Here is a fact that almost no one is willing to sit with. The most powerful secret society in human history was not born in the shadows of a European lodge, was not invented by politicians or revolutionaries, and was not created to control governments or banks. It was born inside the pages of the Bible. And the man who started it all was considered by God himself the wisest human being who ever walked the earth. His name was Solomon. And what he discovered, what he used, what he built, what he unleashed, has been shaping the architecture of your world for over 3,000 years. Most people never ask why cathedrals are built the way they are. Most people never ask why secret brotherhoods obsess over geometry. Most people never ask why the same symbols appear in temples built thousands of years and thousands of miles apart. You are not most people, and what you are about to hear is going to stay with you. Before we go deeper, and we are going very deep today, if this kind of content moves something in you, do something that takes 2 seconds. Hit the like button right now and subscribe to this channel. Not at the end, now. Because what you are about to hear is the kind of thing that gets buried, suppressed, and quietly removed. The algorithm only shows it to people who engage. So before this disappears from your feed, lock it in. Like, subscribe. Let's continue. Let's start where everything starts.
Egypt. And I need you to erase the image you have of it. The dusty ruins, the tourist photos, the cartoons. Ancient Egypt was the United States of the ancient world. It had the equivalent of Harvard, Princeton, and Yale. It was the center of intellectual, spiritual, and architectural power on the entire planet. And the brightest minds from neighboring civilizations made the journey there to study. One of them was a man named Pythagoras. Yes, that Pythagoras, the one with the triangles. What your school never told you is that Pythagoras did not invent mathematics in a Greek classroom. He learned it in Egypt. He spent years studying under Egyptian priests who understood something most modern people have completely lost, that geometry is not just a tool for measuring land. It is a language that connects the physical world to the spiritual one. The word geometry itself tells you this. Geo means earth. Metria means to measure. They were literally measuring the earth along the banks of the Nile to predict the flood cycles, to divide land for agriculture, to organize civilization. But inside that measuring, they found something else. Ratios that appeared everywhere in nature. Proportions that seemed to echo through living things, through planets, through time itself. And they understood that if you could build using those ratios, if you could encode them into stone, you could create something more than a building. You could create a gate.
This is where the stonemasons come in. And here is something most people don't know. When you look at a medieval cathedral, you probably imagine priests and monks directing the construction. That is not what happened. The men who built those structures were organized into secret brotherhoods, guilds with initiatory rites, coded knowledge, and deliberately hidden techniques. They were called the operative masons. They had a union before unions existed, and their power came from one thing. They kept their knowledge secret. They did not teach it to outsiders. They did not write it down for the public. It passed from master to apprentice in private, protected by oaths of silence. Why? Because knowledge is power, and they understood that better than anyone. What knowledge were they protecting? The knowledge of sacred geometry. The knowledge of how to build structures that are not just physically impressive, but spiritually functional. Buildings designed to alter the consciousness of everyone who enters them. The Gothic cathedral is the clearest surviving example of this, and the innovation that made it possible came from a single man, a French abbot named Suger, who developed what is now called the ogival arch, the pointed arch. Before this invention, Romanesque churches had a structural ceiling, no pun intended. The walls had to be thick and massive to support the weight of the stone roof, which meant the windows had to be small, which meant the interior was dark. Suger solved this by redistributing the structural forces through the arch and the flying buttress. Suddenly the walls could be hollow. Suddenly the windows could be enormous. Suddenly you could flood the interior with colored light. But here is the part that changes everything. The light was not placed randomly. It was engineered. The clerestory windows, small openings placed high above the nave, were positioned at a precise angle so that light entered at 45 degrees and illuminated only the central corridor of the cathedral. The side aisles remained in shadow. Light and darkness, deliberately constructed. The separation of the sacred path from the profane one, encoded in stone and glass and geometry. Every detail, every measurement, every ratio, intentional. But this is where the story begins to turn. Most people, when they hear the word Freemasonry, think of men in aprons doing handshakes. They think of conspiracy theories, they think of dollar bills, they think of power and politics. And yes, Freemasonry as a formal institution was established in 1717 in London. That is a historical fact. But the tradition, the knowledge, the initiatory structure, the symbols, the obsession with geometry and temple building goes back much further. Inside Masonic doctrine, depending on the rite, the tradition traces itself all the way back to a biblical figure named Tubal-Cain, a son of Cain, one of the first craftsmen mentioned in Scripture. But the most important figure, the one who appears at the absolute center of Masonic mythology, the one whose temple is the symbolic foundation of everything they do, is Solomon. And what Solomon did, what he discovered, what he opened, goes far beyond architecture. This is where most people stop watching, because what comes next requires you to accept that the world you live in has a layer you cannot see, and that 3,000 years ago, one man found a way to reach into it.
Solomon asked God for one thing, not wealth, not long life, not military power. He asked for wisdom, and God gave it to him. The Bible is clear that no human before or after Solomon possessed his level of understanding. But here is where the story gets complicated, and where the rabbinical traditions, the Kabbalistic writings, and the ancient legends begin to fill in what the canonical text leaves out. Solomon wanted to marry women from neighboring nations. God had told him not to, because those women worshipped foreign gods, and contact with those gods would corrupt him. Solomon did not listen. But he also, according to the legends, did not simply surrender. He attempted something almost unthinkable. He tried to bring those foreign gods under his control, to bind them, to force them to release their hold over the women who worshipped them, so that those women could convert to Judaism of their own free will. To do this, he needed a technology, and he found one. The pentagram, a five-pointed star enclosed within a circle, appears across dozens of ancient traditions. But Solomon's use of it was specific. The circle functioned as a containment field. The geometric precision of the star created a boundary that spiritual entities, according to the tradition, were bound by law to respect. Combined with specific words inscribed around the perimeter, words of power, names drawn from the deep architecture of divine language, the pentagram allowed Solomon to summon spiritual beings and remain protected from them. He could compel them, he could interrogate them, he could put them to work. The ancient text known as the Key of Solomon, the Clavicula Solomonis, is believed to encode these techniques. The word clavicula means key in Latin. These were literally keys to the spiritual world. And Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived, had found a way to use them.
Now, here is the part that almost no one has the courage to sit with. If you think this is mythology, if you think these are just stories invented by primitive people who didn't have science, ask yourself this. Why does the same geometric system appear in Egyptian temples, in Greek sacred sites, in Gothic cathedrals, in Masonic lodges, in alchemical manuscripts, across cultures that had no contact with each other? Why do the same ratios,
the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, the precise proportions of the human body as mapped by Leonardo da Vinci's Vitruvian Man, appear in living systems, in planetary orbits, in the growth patterns of shells and galaxies? Why did every major civilization, independently, conclude that geometry was not just math, but a sacred language? The answer that the modern world refuses to accept is the same answer that Solomon, Pythagoras, the Egyptian priests, the Gothic architects, and the Freemasons all arrived at. There is a structure to reality that is deeper than the physical. There is a mathematical grammar underneath existence. And if you learn to speak it fluently enough, if you encode it into stone with enough precision, something responds. But here is what the legends say happened next, and this is the part that changes the entire story. Solomon's genius eventually outpaced his restraint. He needed to cut stones for the temple, perfect cuts, with a precision that even his most skilled craftsmen could not achieve. He learned, through his methods, that only one being possessed that knowledge, a powerful entity named Asmodeus. According to the Talmudic legends, Solomon located Asmodeus, used wine and a specially prepared vessel to capture him, and then compelled the being to reveal the secret. The secret turned out to involve a creature, a worm called the shamir, whose gaze could cut through stone with a precision that no human tool could replicate. Whether you read this as literal, as metaphor, or as something in between, the structure of the story is significant. Solomon was hacking the spiritual world the way a programmer hacks a system. He was finding vulnerabilities. He was exploiting the rules. And the rules of the spiritual world, according to every tradition that takes this seriously, are real, consistent, and absolute. No entity, regardless of power, is exempt from them. Which means that a human being intelligent enough to understand those rules could, in theory, use them. And Solomon was that human being. He discovered the 72 names of God, derived from a specific reading of 3 consecutive verses in the book of Exodus, each containing exactly 72 Hebrew letters, and used those names as the foundation of his system of spiritual control. Each name is not simply a label. Each name represents a specific frequency, a specific capacity, a specific key that opens a specific door. Together, the 72 names are said to constitute a complete map of divine power. Know all 72, and you have, in theory, navigated the entire architecture of spiritual reality. You have found the master key. If this has unsettled you, good. That means you are finally paying attention to a question that most people spend their entire lives avoiding. Because the real question, the question that connects Solomon to the stonemasons, to the Gothic cathedrals, to Freemasonry, to Leonardo da Vinci, to the architecture of power in the modern world, is not whether these things are real. The real question is, why has this knowledge been hidden? Why is it protected inside initiatory orders with oaths of silence? Why does it appear in coded symbols on public buildings? Why do the most powerful institutions in human history organize themselves around the geometry of Solomon's temple? The answer is not comforting. The answer is that this knowledge works. And knowledge that works, knowledge that gives the person who possesses it a genuine advantage over those who don't, will always be controlled. It will always be rationed. It will always be hidden behind layers of ritual and secrecy and misdirection, because the moment it becomes common property, the advantage disappears. The operative Masons kept their geometric knowledge secret for the same reason, not because it was dangerous in the wrong hands, because it was powerful in any hands. And power, by its nature, concentrates.
So where does this leave you? What do you do with this information? Here is the insight that I want you to carry with you when this video ends. The tradition that runs from the Egyptian priests to Pythagoras, to Solomon, to the Gothic architects, to the Freemasons, to the hidden symbols embedded in the infrastructure of the modern world,
is not primarily a story about secret societies. It is a story about the relationship between structure and reality. It is a story about the fact that the world is not random, that there are patterns underneath it, ratios and proportions and frequencies that govern how things work, how power flows, how consciousness operates. The people who have understood this throughout history have used it. Some used it to build things that endure. Some used it to accumulate control. Some, like Solomon himself, started with wisdom and ended with corruption. Because there is a limit to how much knowledge a human mind can contain before it begins to distort the person carrying it. The Nobel laureate effect, some researchers call it. The phenomenon where a mind that reaches the absolute frontier of knowledge in one domain begins to drift, to lose its grounding, to grasp for frameworks that feel transcendent because the ordinary ones no longer seem adequate. Solomon grasped, and in grasping, he lost what made him Solomon. But the knowledge itself did not disappear.
It passed through centuries, through initiatory orders, through secret brotherhoods of stonemasons who encoded it in the proportions of the buildings they were hired to construct. It is in the cathedrals. It is in the lodge rooms. It is, if you know how to look, in the geometry of the world around you. The question is not whether you believe in it. The question is whether you are willing to look. If this video reached something in you, if it cracked something open, then do something that costs you nothing. Leave a like, and if you are not subscribed yet, subscribe now. This channel exists to ask the questions that don't have easy answers. There is much more coming. The kind of content that most places will not touch. Don't miss it. Subscribe, like, and I will see you in the next one.